All right, you just need to go live and Discord as well.
Discord, let me see. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm on backstage. What?
Yeah, so you just need to click stage. Yeah, you just have to click join
Let me
stage and
change.
it'll switch you.
Okay. Where is our stage?
Do you want me to get you the link?
No, it's okay. I'll just go there. Just 1 sec. Okay. I think I'm there. Do you have to speak on stage? Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Here, Good morning, everybody. We are super excited to have Fernando Herrera here. He's going to be talking about figure drawing and how to translate that to animation. And I will let Fernando take it away.
All right. So, welcome everyone. Very excited to be able to talk about this. So, you probably think it's weird to hear figure animation because we're very used to listening and hearing about figure drawing, right? So this whole idea came up from when I was thinking about figure drawing, really, and when I started with VFX animation, I started to realize that realistic animation have me learning different things that I never thought would be that useful on my side. So the whole reason why I created this is because I think learning realistic animation in the beginning of the process actually, and when you're studying, is very beneficial. So I'll bring up a couple of reasons of why I thought that, and I'll talk about it slowly. So while I'm talking, feel free to leave questions or comments on the chat. This can be very collaborative. So Lacey's gonna help me up whenever there's some questions. I'll just jump on them on the spot. Because this is sort of like a new ish concept, so I'm kind of building it with you guys. So that is gonna be it. Um, okay, so let's talk about it. So first, you're probably seeing this somewhere on Ratatouille, and this is also something that came up in my mind when I was thinking about this. So you probably noticed that many animators kind of fall. Uh, Many animators give up. I think in mid studies, some get more frustrated. You feel like you hit a ceiling that you can't go through. You think you're not talented enough, and I think one of the reasons for that is because um, I think the way we learn animation nowadays has a limitation that doesn't work for everyone. So what does that means is if you remember Gusto from Ratatouille, he would say anyone can cook, and I think anyone can animate. It's just you have to treat it differently. So if you think about animation compared to drawing, for example, uh, usually when you're starting any other type of art like sculpture, even if you start to think you start to study one of those areas like drawing or sculpture or anything like that, you're never going to start by the stylization. You're going to start by learning the realistic aspects or learning how the world works through that medium. So if you're going to learn drawing, you're going to try to go still life, or going to draw figure drawing, understanding the anatomy and understanding perspective. And for some reason, I think we always jump into stylization first in animation. And I think that leaves some people behind because not everyone has the stylization brain from the start. So animation is always something hard enough, I think, to learn. And you also have to learn the workflows and how to stylize it. So um, which I think we still have to anyway. We have to learn stylization at some point, but in the beginning, I think we need to focus on what's the real world and what's the workflow that we need to get there. And then we will find a way to break the rules later. So, a few examples like this is an early work from Pablo Picasso, for example. He's one of the masters of stylization, but he had really good control over lights, forms, perspective, and even anatomy. Uh, this is also some on this work of his work. So this is to explain, I think, why even the best people like Glenn Keane. He's amazing stylizing, and this is stylized, but you see how he controls the human form and he understands the human figure. He's not just drawing a cartoon, you know. This was something very cool as well that we can find that even on a movie like Tarzan, there was a lot of studies on how the anatomy of the character worked, on what's the muscles, what's below that nice line of action. So the whole purpose of this is we are trying to do the same. We are going to try to understand why our body moves like it moves, and uh, how how do we use it in animation really. So this is not only for people that want to animate VFX or realistic animation, or some type of animation like that. So this is going to be very important for anyone really, because as I said, if you know the rules, you can break the rules. So it's easier to break the rules. So in the end, even if you're animating something more towards like a feature animation or cartoons, you still need to understand how or where you're grabbing from. For example, if you're doing a caricature, you're going to base it in real life, but it's very exaggerated from real life, right? So this is the same. We are animating, but we're caricaturizing the animation based on the real world, and we can choose what we can use and where we grab complexity from. Um, so looking at the best, like we have Michelangelo, for example, Da Vinci. You see, they were very big on studying before they did anything, and it was not because they were studying because they are um, very hard workers. That was just their passion. They wanted to understand how it worked, and that fueled their work really. So if a guy stops to do something like this, you have to to agree that they have to be very passionate about understanding the human form and how the world works. And us as animators, that's even more important because you probably heard that before, but animation is the art of observation, right? So we do have a lot that we have to do hands-on or on the computer, like in this case. But in the end, you're gonna feel like you are understanding how the world works in observation, and you're applying that to animation. So we're gonna go very hands-on on that. I'm gonna do a demo after as well, but this is to bring up how and why this needs to happen. Um, okay, so now that we talked about that, today what we're going to do is so same as Michelangelo or Da Vinci. You see how they don't focus on everything at the same time. So they go kind of like, I'm going to study legs today, how the muscle works, or what's the muscle fiber, how I draw it, or whatever. And we're going to do the same. So today we're going to focus on the neck, and that means the head as well, because I feel like that is I'm going to show you guys why that's so complex and why we have to understand how it moves. And I want to get out of that feeling that we're just animating by instinct, and we want to understand why the head is moving like it is. And then we're going to use one of the references to animate on top. And it's going to be sort of like an acting movement, but we're not thinking about acting here. We're going to think about what is the way that the head moves when we're animating acting. And that hopefully will help you guys whenever you're animating an acting shot or performance shot. That will be that will help you use that to even break rules later, or even do something realistic, like a little more to arcane or a little more to Disney. um, but in the end, this is going to be, it's like you have a dial. So if you're able to learn uh, how to get the realistic animation in, and grabbing all the complexity from the reference, is like you have a dial. I want full complexity like the reference, or I want a little less, or like almost like 10%. So the problem is when you can't grab complexity from the reference. So to me, it makes a lot more sense that you learn how to do the hardest thing first, which is going almost 100% realistic. And if you need to dial it down, you're going to have that knowledge, and you just have to turn it off slightly and learn how to stylize it a bit. And you can go down and down and down and understand more each style. But it makes sense that we start by understanding how the human figure works first, than to just start animating SpongeBob, right? So that's the whole idea behind this workshop, and we can go from there. So as I was saying, we're gonna start with heads first today, and each of these workshops we can focus on another part of the body until we're done. So another one could be the arm, the legs, and so on and so forth. So that is why we're studying realism, and that is a bit of a paradigm, because usually people think about realistic animation or creature animation or VFX as something that you learn in the end, like a post graduation thing. So I'm gonna learn all my processes, and then I'm gonna go back and animate and understand how stuff realism works. I think it's kind of the opposite. You have to tap into that in the beginning, and it's kind of what we do, right? On when we're animating basic foundations, we are animating bouncing balls or pendulums, and that's all physics based, which is realistic, right? But we never go to that in the human form or the bipeds or something more organic. We animate something a bit more cartoony. So it kind of, to me, it goes from bouncing balls and pendulums to cartoony suddenly. So the idea is that in the middle of this process, we don't stray away from realism, because that will help fuel you. And like Gusto says, no one's going to fall behind, because we are going to be building all of our base knowledge first before we start to try to stylize something. And some people will stay more in realistic animation. Some people will do VFX. Some people will do more creatures. Some people will like to be more feature animation, very stylized. I don't know. So that's why I'm saying that it works for everyone. And hopefully, after all of these workshops, we're gonna understand all the little parts of the body and know how to move them in a nice workflow. When I say workflow is not going to be the focus of this. It's going to be mostly the observation part. So any workflow should work when we're doing the this sort of tests. And I'm gonna incentive you guys to try to do those things that Da Vinci and Michelangelo did. It's kind of like you have a scrapbook animation. So instead of always going and animating shots for a demo reel, it's always good to do tests as well. And let me try to animate this arm doing this, or let me try to animate the hand today, which you guys even did on a mini challenge recently. So that was really cool. Um, so that's why we study realism. Okay. So feel free to ask any questions if it's not making sense, or if you want to clarify anything. So drop it on the chat. Okay. Uh, so one thing that is important concept as well is when we're thinking about um, realism, is that we are also observing the imperfection of it, of the real life, right? So usually when we see something moving a bit more realistic, it's almost a little more dirty and it feels a lot more complex. So when we dive into the references, you guys will see, especially for the head, it's something that stands out a lot because we're always trying to think about cleaning up the nose or the arc of the nose, and it's a lot more complex than that. uh, okay, cool. Okay, so another concept, let me bring this up. So the muscles of the body. So that's a very simplified graphic uh, of the muscles that I grabbed from the internet. But the idea here is that, so every time you're trying to break down a reference, we are going to try to understand where the movement is coming from. So the most important part before you jump into Maya or do anything is to understand how something is moving, right? So uh, in the end, this is going to be helpful for us because we are trying to understand how stuff works, right? So uh, here, for example, I don't have to have a very good understanding of the muscles or how they're called. I just have to understand how they work, right? So basically, each muscle fiber. Okay, go. Sorry, my daughter is entering. Yeah. Yeah, you're going to sleep. Go to the vai lá na sala. Vai lá, por favor. Sorry, guys. My daughter wants to be part of it.
Everyone in the comments agrees that it was very adorable. I think there's no apologies needed. It was
She likes to sleep on my couch, man. Just 1 second, she forgot her cereal.
In the meantime, does anyone have a question they want to ask Fernando? Just drop it in the chat with a cue at the beginning, and we are gathering questions throughout the stream.
All right, cool. I'm back. So I was talking about the muscle diagram here. So let's jump into this example here. So every time you have to break down a reference or you have something you want to animate, instead of just looking at how it moves, you try to understand where it comes from. So for example, this guy is going to jump. In this case, we have he's bending his knees and then he's standing his legs to jump. So thinking about how this works, if you go back to this diagram here, uh, we have the muscles in the front here and the muscles in the back of the thigh, right? So the way muscles work is they flex, so you constrain your muscles and then you let it go, right? So the extension of the muscle doesn't do anything. It's the compression of the muscle that creates motion in our bodies, right? So if I'm bending my knees, basically, if you ever went to the gym, you know that bending your knees is the behind of your thigh muscles, uh, the what's it called? I forget the name of the muscle, but yeah, hamstrings. But for example, if the guy is bending his knees here, I know that he's controlling that with the back of his leg here, the muscles doing that. And then the opposite way, when he is extending his legs, these are the muscles that are acting. So if I try to understand where it's coming from, I start to make more sense of. Oh, my camera lost focus. Let me see. Ooh. Is that better?
It's a little better, maybe.
Yeah, sometimes. If I missed. Okay,
It's
maybe I can.
yeah. Maybe
Sometimes that happens.
maybe if you turn it off and back on. Hmm.
Let me see. Yeah, but that's gonna be on OBS. So let me try to refocus it. But anyways, you don't. I don't have to look pretty anyway. It's just yeah, pay more attention to the to the stream. But yeah, thanks for letting us know. Okay, so thinking about this example here, so the reason why we're thinking where the movement comes from is that we start to keep on the back of our heads why something is moving like it's moving, and why, for example, in a jump it's important to have this pose, which is the extended leg. So one thing is for you to know, for example, if you're getting uh, like a formula like the walk cycle, for example, we already have those predefined poses on walk cycles, like contact, down, passing, up, right? But sometimes if you're doing, for example, a jump, I already know that I always need to have the extension frame on the leg, and I also have when it's landing. Let's go to the landing. It kind of stretches as well because we are trying to absorb the weight, and I know that for the most part, the this part of the leg is going to be holding and helping break the motion, so it's going to be absorbing the energy. So it's easy to understand now where the movement is coming from, and that I need the muscles from on the back and the front of my leg to move me pretty much. And one interesting concept that we can keep in mind is looking at the arm here, for example. For the arm, okay, we can maybe try to figure out where it's coming from in terms of the shoulder, or maybe the back of the arm here. But on some parts of the body, you start to realize that, you see, sometimes it's more physics based and sometimes it's more muscle based. So if you're breaking down reference, you're able to understand if that is more physics or more muscle, then you're going to be able to understand better why and how that's moving. Um, on the leg, it's usually more muscle because it's like grounded. But for the arm, is usually going to have a lot of mix between physics and muscles. And if you think about a cat's tail, for example, we usually animate it more like physics, but it has a lot of muscle built in as well. So that's what makes it so hard. So in the process of breaking down references, if you always keep that in mind, like, what am I seeing? Is this more like physics? For example, here, this is definitely like gravity, and uh, I would say it's more physics than muscle, but the muscle is holding the arm shape. Um, so if I start to think about that, is sometimes if your animation is feeling a bit weightless, is because you're not thinking about physics enough as well. Because weight, the only thing that the easiest way to demonstrate weight is uh, basically thinking about how that mass is affected by physics. If it's not being affected by any gravity or inertia, it doesn't feel like it has weight, right? It's just a muscle moving in the vacuum. So in the end, like the whole body, like when the character is dropping here, just the fact that all this uh, all this mass is falling and is being held by the leg muscles, it shows that it has weight and is being pulled by gravity. So I don't need to be the best physics guy, or I don't need to be the best anatomy guy, but I need to understand where stuff is coming from, basically, right? So that's why it's important to break it down. So let's jump into talking about more about the head. So let me know if that's all making sense so far. Cattail defies physics. Yeah, Montrosky. If you look at some references, uh, that's usually the hardest thing, I think, to figure out, because if you animate uh, it like it should be, then you will look weird and wrong maybe sometimes in animation. So that's a bit tough. Let me look through here. Let me know if you guys have any questions so far. Let me try to do something here. Maybe if I stop my camera. Okay. Cool. Maybe that improves my focus. It doesn't. Kind of.
It did for a second.
He doesn't want to. Reality is so fake sometimes. Yes, Thomas. Have you ever felt like when you're walking on the street and if you see some weird type of movement or weird lights, if I did that in CG, someone's gonna say it's fake. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the neck part now. So that will look so fake in animation. Yes. Okay. So this is just to demonstrate how complex the neck muscles are. And the fact that we don't need to know exactly where the movement is coming from, but look at how many tiny little muscles there are in the neck, and it's just the back parts. So that tells me that the movement of the head shouldn't be predictable at all, because it's not just like the leg. It's not one muscle bending in the front or compressing in the front or in the back. Also, my camera seems to be back. Um, so it's really a sum of thousands of not thousands but hundreds of muscles bending back and forth. So it's a lot, and there's even the ones attached to the vertebrae here. So this is to explain in a simple way with just a few of the muscles how this moves. Okay, so if you see this motion here, so what we were saying is whenever we constrict or reflex the muscle, it causes something, right? So if my head is going back, it's because there's a muscle here that is compressing and is bending my cervical here or my neck, right? So this motion, whenever the muscle is activated, it bends my neck back. And whenever I let it go, or it's not always just letting it go, it's going to be a muscle in the front constricting as well. So there's always going to be some muscle activating uh, because our head is very stabilized as well, right? So it's very interesting to see how, because we definitely don't feel that our muscles are constricting because we're not using a lot of force on it. So it feels very natural, right? And that's why it's so hard to think about it in animation, because it's very easy for us to move it that way. So we're not, it doesn't feel like I'm flexing my muscles, because when we think flexing, we think about force and gym. But if you force your neck to go that way in a strong way, then you start to feel where that's coming from. Maybe that's something you can try in front of the mirror to understand why your reference is doing something. And here's the same thing. Even to turn the neck, it's going to be a muscle pulling it, but it's not only one muscle. It's just a summatory of all the muscles doing something. And here we even have the trapezius that affects the neck as well. So you see there's a lot of strong muscles as well that are holding it. And this is the part that, I don't know if you guys are old like me, but you always get some type of cramp here or this extension. Usually this is where you need massage because it's very tough and it has a lot of knots. Um, exactly, yeah, that's a Line said. I often lay my hand on the muscle So it really helps me understand where it's coming from. That's a great point, because even talking a lot about gym today, but if you're trying to think if you're doing the right thing on your exercise, usually put your hand in the muscle to see if you're activating the right muscle that you want to train. So that's, you can use that for animation as well to understand what is actually doing, so you understand where it's coming from as well, to make sure that if you're animating something with a leg, you know that why the body is going forward is because I'm using something in my leg that is pulling me. It's not just being naturally pulled forward. So when we start to think too much about motion and visual motion, we start to lose the idea of why it's moving that way. And we don't need to know exactly why it's moving that way. We just need to know roughly why it's moving that way, right? Which is basically what I'm doing. I'm not an expert on anatomy or biomechanics. It's just from observation, I can understand why it's moving. Really. Okay. Uh, cool, cool. So let's jump back here. Okay, nice. So now what we can do is I'm gonna talk a little about this. Okay, so I brought this example here, and this is a bit counterintuitive because usually you'll see a reference like this, and I just muted because the audio is not important, it's more like the movement. So usually if you think about an acting shot, you think, okay, it's not body mechanics, right? Because it's acting. So I'm thinking about how or what I'm going to animate that is going to emote in a proper way, or that is going to have a proper body language to I want, or the expression, or so on and so forth. But the motion is the base of it. So if I don't know how to create good motion, I'm not going to be very successful animating the head in this way. And the head is gesturing a lot. So gesturing, it's also body mechanics. So it's just maybe not a parkour, not a climb, but you have to think about it like the base motion of it. So when you look at a example like this, uh, what I like about breaking down references is that you're going to notice a lot of things that you weren't going to do by natural or naturally. Um, Kinds of spacing or movement that are so sharp that you never thought it would be right. You happen on references, and you can understand and maybe learn from it and get away from your comfort zone. So usually animators that have a few years under their belt, with experience, they're going to uh, have some like a bag of tricks. I don't know if you guys feel the same, but you kind of always come back to the same. So if you're animating a character turning, you're going to always do the little dip of the nose, and then you want to create a good arc to go there. And you're always going to have a little arc in the end. It's always going to be a perfect little line in the nose. And or you're going to use the little chicken neck uh, uh, way of doing something, or you're either going to do the little head shake or something like that. So it starts to become, you start to feel like you're out of ideas sometimes, because I only have a few ways of moving my head when you look at animation, right? But if you're thinking about the reference and how the head is moving, you're going to see something like this that it feels kind of crazy how it's moving, right? So
Fernando, would you
yeah.
be up to move your webcam to the opposite side? Because
Oh yeah,
yes, I figured
it's
you were going to
getting in
talk
the
about
way.
the. Yeah, I
There you
figured
go.
you were going to talk about the neck, so I wanted
Yeah.
to catch you.
Maybe I put it here, so no. Cool. Thank you, Lacey. All right, cool. So talking about this guy here, the part that really stood out to me, and often does when I'm looking at references, especially references that I didn't shop myself, because sometimes I feel like when I shoot a reference, I'm already thinking about the animation, and I'm trying to do the proper arc, which is not good sometimes because you're erasing some of the complexity and just thinking about what's the movement that you want to do. You want to think about the acting, and you have to react to how that moves pretty much. So, but the motion that I thought was really interesting that we're going to try to replicate is this. So if you track his nose, isn't it? It doesn't it feel like kind of poppy? Like, okay, if I show this to a supervisor or even me, I would say, oh, so this is pinned for a frame, and then you pop up here. So it looks very dirty, doesn't it? Sorry. But this is the kind of stuff that makes it feel natural as well. So I'm really addicted to finding these little things that are not super straightforward. And in the beginning, I see a lot of the side to side. So um, that's the thing as well. Like the head rotation is a very big part of it, the rotation Y. And depending on how you do it, it gives you a different feeling, right? So I see here that here is a bit more straightforward. Like you see a lot of the acceleration on the nose. But if we're thinking about the neck, basically, if I'm thinking about this, what am I thinking is from this other videos that we've seen, we know that maybe a muscle here is pulling my neck the other side, right? So if I'm looking to this guy, the guy is a very good actor, by the way. I can send you guys his link later. But yeah, if I'm turning my head to this side, I know that there's a muscle here that is pulling it, and some other bunch of muscles that are controlling the head to move in a certain way. So our brains automatically move our neck in the way that we are feeling or we want to emote, for example. So if I'm turning to the other side, I know that these muscles are kind of pulling it this way, or the back of the neck muscles are pulling it the other way. And it has nothing to do with the nose, right? But we're very addicted to looking at how the nose moves. And sometimes it's going to be pretty straight. The reason why we go to the classic dip of the nose is because we are not putting complexity enough in the head, and then we feel like we need to create an arc. But if you're thinking about all the little motions that are happening on this head, then you're gonna start to feel like I don't actually need a lot of that. I just need proper motion. So I also not using only the rotation Y. So you see when if you see my camera here, when I'm rotating my head, it's not like one axis. It's like you have a kind of summatory of my head tilt and my rotation Y, or this or side to side rotation. And that also comes into the the range of motion, right? Let me bring that up as well. Um, yes. Forgot about this one. Yeah. So looking at this here, this also is something that is very important to understand for each part of the body before you start to animate, which is the range of motion, right? So looking at this guy rotating his head, uh, he is not a very extreme motion, so that is not super important. But whenever you're animating something with the head or with an arm, with a hand, my hand, I know it's not going to go past this angle. For example, I know the biggest angle that I can reach with this is like this. So if I'm posing it in a way that is respecting the range of motion, is going to be uh, the best way to do it. So this is important as well. So looking kind of like the x-ray of how the head moves, we can understand that is not the head rotating. Sometimes we feel like it is because we have the head controller and we're rotating that around. And if be honest, you sometimes forget about the neck. Uh, or always. And I'm guilty of that as well. But if you're animating the head, you're actually animating the neck. Maybe the control of the head is the most important, but you have to understand that the neck is like it's creating the neck is what is pointing the head around. So uh, and when I do this, it always has to involve the neck in some way. So it's not possible to rotate your head down without curving your neck, or to the side or up, and so on and so forth. So this is important, very important for posing and for the motion itself, because you're going to feel like the head is isolated very often in animation. So keep that in mind. It feels like the chest. Montrosky is saying, yeah, it feels like the chest keeps countering the head too. Exactly, yeah. So it's all we call connectivity. So when you're moving your head, it's not going to move only the head. So if you move your any part of your body is going to affect something, maybe to a lesser extent. But if I'm rotating my head, it's always going to move my chest a little bit, right? And that's also to say, if you think about more subtle motions like a moving hold or a breathing uh, motion, if you look at my camera here too, if I'm breathing, I'm gonna breathe in a strong way, so you see how my body moves. So you see how it affects the whole body. So even if I'm not doing anything, just by breathing, I'm affecting my silhouette just by breathing and staying in balance. So the reason why realistic animation looks a bit more dirty, or it looks more complex in a way, is because we are showing all those forces working together. So if I have a moving hold in realistic motion, or if I'm just holding the character, there are a lot of things acting there. So I just showed you guys how many muscles are supporting the neck. So never when we are standing up, a bunch of muscles are acting. Is they're not relaxed. So if I'm laying down, maybe I'm relaxed and I'm sleeping. But if I'm sitting down or if I'm standing up, there are a bunch of muscles activated, and the muscles activation is not super smooth. And when you're keeping in balance, you're changing all the little muscles that are acting at the same time, and you also have the breathing, and you also have your balance acting through the laws of physics. You have to balance yourself so you don't fall. So all those forces together end up feeding something a little random in the general motion or the silhouette of the character. So that is usually something that we simplify or stylize on other types of animation. But if we know where it's coming from and we know that's happening, I can use it when I want and I can not use it when I don't. So, but when you're animating something that is more subtle, that you're just holding the pose, you're most likely feel like you don't know what to do because nothing is happening. If you can, guys can let me know if you ever felt like that. But um, usually when you're animating something super subtle, you're having the fear that, okay, my shot is gonna look floaty. What should I do? And if you have your dial of complexity to turn up when you want, that's going to help you a lot. That's why we're doing this pretty much. Okay. So let's go back to our dude here. Okay. So let's see what else we can learn from it. And I'm just not looking at the face at all, just looking at the head and the neck. Okay, so one thing I can notice as well is that um, there's a lot of variation of how much he rotates his head and back and forth. So it's not, this is something that makes it feel natural as well. And I also have the little fight between the rotation Z and rotation X, if you guys noticed. So it's always a little like this, even if it's tiny, but it adds complexity, right? So here's a moment that I was mentioning to you guys. So even when nothing is really happening, the silhouette is still moving. It's most likely because maybe you're breathing or so the reason that is moving, uh, it's important if it's breathing, but you don't necessarily need to understand exactly where it's coming from, because it's almost impossible to know. Because there are a lot of forces acting in that character at the same time, and sometimes it's something off camera as well. You just need to understand that that is moving, and whenever I have my character holding a pose, it's not going to be just standing there. And I'm not even talking about the thought process or acting, because as I said, I'm just thinking about what is the motion and how I can do it the best way, and how I can even use it later to fuel an acting assignment. But something that I feel people um, maybe play down a lot is that when you're animating an acting shot, you're thinking a lot about the performance, but I see a um, lesser worry or less importance with how the body is actually moving in the mechanics way of it, you know? So that is as important, because if you don't have a convincing motion, you're going to lose uh, a lot of the performance that you want to show, and it's not going to connect as well for the audience as well. So you want to have something based on reality, grounded on reality, so it feels like it has a connection to you, you know. So that's usually the most successful animation, when even if it's simplified, it's grounded on reality, you know. So even if I'm animating something that is out of this world, so it's not on Earth, for example, we're always grounding it somehow in some set of rules. So even if I'm animating, for example, a character in space, in the vacuum, the motion is going to be totally different, but it feels like it's respecting the rules of that environment, if that makes sense. So that's why I think the whole mechanics part of it is it's very important, because it's like the fuel of your animation. So if you don't have very good motion, even if you have great performance, you're going to be losing half of it, something like that. Okay, so that part that I was telling you guys that I felt it was very interesting, and also notice that if I'm thinking only about the nose, I'm going to lose a lot of the head angle changes here. You see what I mean? So here it feels like almost pivots more from the top, and then the chin has a lot of motion, but the top doesn't have a lot. So that helps me understand that the rotation, the head tilt has a lot happening there. And here we see that's pretty big straight line, and then it drops. And I see here that it feels like there's a lot of zigzag on the nose, but there's not really. It's just the way the head is shaking in the head tilt and rotation Z here. And then again, I have a big straight line again. So one thing to learn is that a lot of straight lines are going to happen. Of course, we can smooth them out a little bit, but you see how it's important to get away from that little dip of the nose, you know? Let's see something saying, Charles is saying, when practicing acting shots where only the face and little bit of chest is visible, I do animate the cog. Yeah. You shouldn't animate the legs. Sometimes, for example, if the character is standing up, I would at least try to understand if the character is going to take a half step or something, because that affects the way that he moves on camera, um, depending on how he moves. So um, I was working on a shot. I don't think I have here to show you guys, but if the character is just sitting down and acting like that, so it's one thing. If the character is like anxious and like stepping around, it's important for me to figure out what are the step changes, so I know what happens to the body. So with each step, I'm going to have weight shift, right? So depending on the shot, is super important not to animate the legs or polish them, but just to put the contact frames so you know when something is moving, so you know what to do with the COG. But the COG, I would say, is pretty important, especially when you're standing up, because uh, it's going to be what everything is coming from that root, right? uh, you sometimes don't have to only animate that. You can, when you have a shot like this, for example, like we're seeing here, I can give a little more importance to the chest, for example. But at a certain point, I would say at least try to plan what's happening below. Uh, the biggest thing that I feel that happens when I'm like ignoring what happens below the camera is I have that feeling that the character is in a skateboard moving around or sliding, and it doesn't move with a step, you know. So that is I think I would put a lot of importance on. But if I feel like my character is not actually doing any steps or adjustment steps, it's just weight shifting, then it's not that important to think about the legs because you're just balancing yourself. And almost any motion works in terms of moving your weight around because you're not seeing the legs balance anyway. Uh, but it's important to keep in mind that it is a weight shift or it is a motion that you're using for balance. Does that make sense? Um, so that's usually how I think about it. Let me know if that works. Um, but yeah, I think that's a good question because it's totally in line with what we're saying here. If you're not considering what's the mechanics behind that motion, you're you're in the bad shape because it's going to be harder for you to figure out why the character is moving like it is, and you're just going to feel like you're moving something on screen to make it look cool, you know. So any type of motion that I would do, I would try to understand physically why it's moving, and if I want to make it more complex or grounded in reality, or if I can maybe cheat and do a little arc with the COG, that sometimes works as well. But as long as that feels like it has proper physics behind it, I think that's usually how it works. Okay, so let's go to the next part here. That when I play, it feels like a kind of simple motion, but you see how the end of that motion it has a lot of complex rotation as well. It's not just one smooth rotation. It feels like the he's kind of using his Y rotation here as he's moving. So there's a lot of spacing change in the nose. And then suddenly he does a big motion again. So there's a little one here, and then I decrease the spacing, and then it goes again. And again, that's something that I'll probably won't do in the animation, but it's like a straight angle, you see? Almost. But that's just to let you know, like, uh, arcs and spacing is important that they're polished and smooth, but there's not everything. You can make something like this work. So the most important part is it's appealing. Is it appealing? And is it based on reality? So this is smoother motion. Sometimes you can see that even the jaw opening kind of affects the head a little bit. And in this case, you see that there's a lot of the acceleration and the spacing decreasing here. And then we have a big diagonal line again. So this is the kind of stuff that I like to figure out I'm not saying that everything should be straight. It's just you see how it's important to break down the reference because at least from the camera angle, it looks kind of straight. So you can definitely break that down slightly and you make a little more curvy and a little more arc. But the whole point is that I'm not doing an arc for an arc. I'm doing something because uh, the muscles all summing all together are making that type of motion, right? So if I'm seeing a straight line from here, maybe if I'm looking more from the profile, it's more like this, So uh, we are able to adapt what we see from our camera, so it's a little more appealing. But what I see here is interesting because it's a is sometimes what you see on the arc of the nose is not going to be an arc depending on how the muscles are working together. Yeah, here definitely I think is the only motion that I feel like is a little more physics based. Feels like he had let his head loose a little bit, and we feel like there's a little weight to it. So for the head, if you look at my camera here, like uh, the version of that will be a bit more physics like is, for example, if you're doing a sigh or you're doing you're breathing out, or you're relieved, so you're doing like so you're gonna let your muscles relax, and that has an effect on the body language as well. But I know that if I'm doing this, I'm actually letting the physics work, and I'm turning off most of my head muscles, and it's just acting physics now. So that's why it's important to try to figure out when something is what, because um, animating physics is kind of different than animating muscles, isn't it? So, for example, when I say physics, if you animate a horse that has the tail, its tail is like pretty much hair, right? So if you're animating the horse's tail, is all physics pretty much, except for maybe the base. But it's important for you to understand how to animate something that is more physics based, like a hair, or maybe a very loose tail, or a ponytail, or bunny ears. So it's a different workflow, isn't it? So if you know how to animate that, you kind of have to shift gears into animating something that feels more follow through, overlapping action, drag. And when I know that's actually the muscle working, it's something different, right? Because every muscle has a way of twitching as well. Some are more twitchy than others. On the face, for example, the muscles are a lot more twitchy than on their body. On the neck is very smooth, so you feel like you have a lot of control because there's a lot of muscles. Uh, and usually on your whole body, you have some more control, and you have smoother motion on those muscles. Okay, so we can start to jump in and try this in Maya. Now that we study it, you guys have any questions so far? All good? If you just give a thumbs up if all's going right. All good so far? All good. Nice. Okay, cool. Uh, okay, let me just jump back here. Yeah, so we're going to talk about this. All right, okay, I forgot about this one. So this was an interesting way to look at it. So this is also a getting simplified way of showing it, but just to say, like, we kind of know like this is one of the biggest muscles that will help. Even if you're constraining this muscle, you're tilting your head or you're rotating your head. You have the trapezius here, that is the strongest muscle, I think, on the neck area. And there's a bunch of little intertwined muscles in the neck that is going to stabilize your head and have smoother motion working, because our head is supporting our eyes and our brain. So it makes sense that we evolved to have a neck that stabilizes and makes our head move so smoothly. If you were shaking all the time, you were probably gonna have some trouble. And that's not to say like we are the most stable neck in nature. Like you can see a chicken, for example, to see a difference. And I don't even know how that works in terms of most muscles, but it's just to let you know that everything in nature kind of try to stabilize the neck in a way. And when you look at reference, most of the time our head is going to be pretty stable unless it's being motivated by something voluntary from our neck muscles. Cool. Let's go here. So I'm going to be using um, a character from the Agora.Community website. Oops, not this one. Yes, go. I have prepared my file. So let me just let you guys know what I was planning here. So before we start, usually what I would like to do is, so this could be almost like a day worth of a workshop if we did stuff together. So for example, I'm going to show you guys and demonstrate how I would animate this, trying to match this reference. And at a certain point, you would do it yourself, and then we talk about it. But what I'll do is going to do a shorter version. I'm going to animate, and then we're going to be done. We're going to open for questions and all, but you should go and try it for yourself, even if it's not today. And I would like you guys to keep that as a like almost a assignment for yourselves. Like try to like if you ever felt interested in animating figure in going to a figure drawing class, you should have the same interest to do that for animation. So use that as a scrapbook for your animation. And maybe this week you try to do a head. Sometimes you can do uh, an arm or so on and so forth. And initially you can just try to do what I'm doing here, trying to replicate the reference. Sometimes you can try to test your head to something a bit more stylized, for example. So it's important that you treat study as a study, you know. So we are, I know because I'm like that as well, but we always want to do something that is demo reel worthy, right? So uh I mean, it makes sense because we need that because it's demo reels that show what we can do. But this is something that if you turn this into a quick assignment or a quick test or a study session, this is going to help fuel your day-to-day work or your next shot, for example, and it's going to actually be making big strides in how you understand it. Because let's say I have to animate something exactly like this, but I don't have reference for some reason, or I can't use a reference. You should be able to animate something with the same complexity if you study other references. Uh, so, for example, if I study this reference from this guy and I understood all of how the neck muscles work, or even I looked at all the other references and I did all my due diligence, at a certain point, I'm going to be understanding enough how the mechanics of that works so I can go on and try it for myself, even without reference. Uh, and that happens a lot in animation, right? Sometimes we can't have a reference. Maybe not for this because we can always record ourselves moving the head, but in some ways, like depending on the character, you're not going to have it, but you're going to have the same knowledge of how that moves. And all the stuff that we were breaking down together, like how the spacing of the nose felt or how the head tilt felt, that's information for you and experience. So if you try it once, next time you have to do it, you're going to have all that information on the back of your head. Even if you don't remember exactly, it's going to be part of your instinct, because we animate stuff by instinct as well. Don't we? Like even posing, we start to do from instinct, and then we start to think about a few principles. But at the most that you can feel your head with studies and training, that's going to be a base knowledge for you for to animate anything else after. Normally what we do is we just work and learn, right? And that is good to a certain point, but it takes a lot of years for you to animate a lot of different things. Like for example, after almost 20 years, if I never had a hand shot, for example, I wouldn't have studied hands. You see what I mean? So it's very important for you guys, especially in the early years of your careers or your studies, to try stuff like this and make it a project that is not unachievable. So something that is quick to do, because we don't have time nowadays for anything, right? So we watch TikTok and shorts because we don't have time for anything else. We just want to go faster on anything. So try to keep that same way of thinking here. We just want to do something quick, and that's also gonna help you um, practice to use references. So I see that a lot of people have trouble even matching a reference. It feels like it's easy, right? Because you're seeing it side by side, just do exactly what it's doing there. But there's a lot of uh, observation skills that goes into it that you forget, and you start to be too worried about the workflow or the animation or the arcs or whatever. So what we're gonna do here now is I'm gonna do a pass, then I'm gonna try to match this guy acting as, or this guy's head movements as best as I can compared to the reference. And this process, I would say, it's like turning off your animation brain. It's just turning on your observation skills. So I don't want to think about arcs or spacing or posing or anything else. That's going to come naturally from some instinct I already have. But I want to see, like, every time I'm changing frames here, I want to see the observation of what is moving, how much is moving, where it's coming from, and what should I be doing with my character to replicate that. So one thing is seeing emotion, one other thing is trying to replicate it. So uh, it's almost like we're doing our personal manual mocap. And if you're able to do that, that's going to help you in many other things. Sometimes that's going to be a very good base for a blocking. Sometimes it's going to be something that is you need to have because it's super realistic animation you're doing. Sometimes you see a very cool motion in a reference that you really want to put in your animation, and if you ever felt like you can't, oh, it's not working, what's missing, so if you're able to do this moment of matching your animation very closely, you are able to extract any complexity that you see from now on. So if you keep testing that and keep using it in many other occasions, like I'm gonna do an arm today, I'm gonna do um, you can even do it with a face. For example, the face is also muscles, right? So you can do many other type of scrapbook animation and test it. Really, don't spend weeks doing something. Sometimes it's good to spend a few days maybe trying to understand how something moves. Don't do something super long as well. Like choose a portion that it feels like is going to be meaty for you and or something interesting that you've seen. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So any questions so far? I see comments. Yeah, Link, Lacey posted the rig there. That's cool. So you see, I'm using this rig um, on purpose because it doesn't have a face. So I'm gonna feel um, tempted to animate a face or anything like that. So I know that it's gonna be coming exactly just from the head and neck, right? So what I usually do in this case is here, I'm just gonna set it up there. Okay, so I don't want to animate the arms today because they're off camera, so just lower them. So I know that from here, I see that he's not moving much, so I'm gonna use only the chest on this case. So I'm basically going to be doing just those three controllers. Maybe the shoulders, we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to create, usually what I do is I'll create a button for a selection. And I'm going to create another button for head and neck. So I'm going to have it here, right? Okay. And what I'll do is, as I said, the workflow, if you want to do staffed or spline, almost doesn't matter. What matters is your observation, right? So usually what I like to do in this case is here, for me, I think it's easier to go directly on spline because it's just a few controllers. Then it's almost like a layered animation approach, right? Let's see. Yeah, okay. So what I'll do is I think it's better if I have a little base for the chest motion before I go into the head. So I'm going to try to observe what's happening on the reference, the chest area first, the rotations of it and how it moves, and then I'll jump into the neck and the head. So my initial pose is going to be a little crooked like that, forward slightly. And I'll just use my initial pose with the neck poking forward a bit. Okay, so let's try to go and see, am I set up on? Okay. Okay, so what I'll do is, you see there's not a lot of movement on the chest, so it's just a base. So I'm gonna go very loosely on it, and I just want to see whenever there's something big or like something like this happening, I'm gonna try to match it. And even on the smaller things. So what I'll do is, in this case, I'll go like, I don't know, every 10 frames, I'm gonna see how it moves. And it's very important to have a reference that is stabilized, because you see when I'm going from frame 1 to 10, it's only the character moving, it's not the camera. When you have the camera moving as well, it's super hard to understand what is moving and where it's coming from. So whenever you can stabilize your reference, that's always great. So here I'm gonna be rotating my character forward slightly. Here, notice there's a little bit of rotation there. So what I'm trying to do is have the same amount of motion and similar axis moving for everything. And I'm gonna go straight ahead because there are no, well, maybe whenever it comes forward, maybe there, you can consider that a key pose. But I can just do it on the fly here in this case because the chest is not the most important thing in this shot. So I just want to use it sort of like as a base. And as I said, I'm just going to use the chest for this shot. So you see what I did here, definitely moving too much, and it's a lot more than the reference. So that's something that I want to make sure I get it right. So you see that is going back and up slightly. So I think it should be less. So I'll just steal a frame from here. Yeah, that's better. I'll use a little bit of rotation here as well, because I see that this shoulder seems to be going higher than the other. So I'm just going to use bit rotations Z. Is that Z in this case? Yeah, each rig has its own axes. Okay, so I see that I should be shouldn't do this at home. I should have switched to to IK first, but that's not gonna matter in this case, okay? You should usually have something like this. Definitely someone in the other departments would hate me if I did this because I'm breaking the rig. You get a call. Fernando, what are you doing? Okay, so you see how if I just scrub through the frames, it feels like I'm replicating pretty well what's happening there, huh? Maybe not exactly right, but at least I think I have the same flavor. And that's what I call prioritizing observation. So you see, I'm not even thinking how many frames I'm choosing. I'm just going even every 10 frames. I could go arbitrary 4 frames. I don't know. If I want to grab more detail, I'll go less frames. If I have less details, I'll go more frames. And that's also something that you can use if you're trying to animate something more stylized. You don't have to go pretty hard on every 3 or 4 frames. You match what the reference is doing, so you can be more loose. But that's what I say. You can choose to go and use your observation to grab exactly what's coming from there, uh, or you don't. One thing, I don't know if you guys know this, but if you use different sizes for your gizmo, it doesn't feel like it changes anything, but technically it does, because if you're using a super long uh, handle like this, you have more range to move it pretty much. But just so you know, so it is a bit more subtle of movement if you have that. I feel like it's going back slightly as well. So what Montrosky was asking earlier, I think in this shot is not super important that I'm figuring out what the legs are doing, because I already looked at the reference and it felt like the feet shouldn't be doing anything. It's just standing there. So I'm basically animating the chest here. It could be the COG2. That could work. In this case, I'm just gonna try to go faster. But you see what I mean. Okay, so here I see that our guy stopped and it's kind of rotating up and moving us slightly. Here I want to go a bit closer, I guess. There's a lot of complexity happening. And you see the rotations here are very sensitive, because anything that I do here, I move the head around a lot. So you have to be careful that you're very precise with your rotations, especially whenever you feel like it rotates the head a lot. This one, not so much, but this two here, this two, I have to be very precise with them. To a certain extent, I see people on almost all the styles of animation and all the studios to do something like this, a pass of figuring out the reference to more or less extent, you know. So that's a very important skill to grab. And as I said, if you train and make yourself great at grabbing everything that you see from the reference and very complex, it's easy to turn that down. What's harder is for you to turn it up when you don't have that on your experience, you know? So that's why running back and saying, yeah, it's important to test or explore realistic or more realistic animation early on. So usually what happens is the result of this pass is going to be a bit messy on the viewport because I'm doing everything very visually. So that's not to say it's an all be end all be all. This is like a visual pass, and it's very possible that I have to go into the graph editor and improve that a bit because I may be creating uh, some motion that is too poppy or too weird in terms of the axis that I felt like I was doing the right thing through the reference, but it's all visual, so you might be making mistakes here and there. So it's always possible you have to go back and just polish it up a bit, refine for a few minutes, just to get rid of any distracting points before you go to the head. But in this case, I'm not doing anything super complex, so it's probably going to be enough. And that's why I say I'm turning off my animation brain because I'm not even looking at what the head is doing. I'm just trying to see how much the chest is moving. And all my planning and reference breakdown happened earlier. So I already know that his chest is more like reacting than doing any super important motion. So when I get back to the head, then I can maybe think about a bit more the muscle side of it. And but in the end, it's all more to serve as a base knowledge and understand how something is moving and why it's moving, than something that needs to be super active on your head the whole time you're animating. So as I'm animating the head, I'm not going to be thinking, okay, I'm rotating this way, so this is the muscle. We don't need to do that. It's more like uh, it's important for you to know why it moves, and that's gonna change your perception sometimes. What I see students struggle with the most is observing every little detail. So some people, I would say, would understand that it's rotating, but they wouldn't pay attention that the silhouette is actually going up as well. So that's the kind of thing that I mentioned. Observation is very important here because I'm trying to really go close to what the reference is doing there. So I should be doing more or less, and I'm gonna be making mistakes too. But the best that you get at doing this is gonna be faster to do, and you're gonna be making less mistakes, and you're gonna need less refining later.
We actually had a question from Twitch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, A to the J is asking what you think of the anatomy for sculptors books. Would that be helpful for understanding more about this topic?
For sculpture, what? Sorry.
AJ was asking, what do you think of the anatomy for sculptors books? Is
Oh,
that
sculpture
helpful for
books.
this?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm basically grabbing from the internet, but if you have a book that breaks it down very nicely for you, that's usually even better because it's you don't have to be searching all the information on the internet yourself, and that's usually someone with a more artistic brain to be explaining that to you. So definitely, I think that's good. I'm a big fan of modeling and sculpting as well. So I've seen very good work done in that area, like because anatomy is even more important for sculptors. Uh, so a lot of the knowledge that we can grab from is probably already broken down nicely to artists. So that definitely a good idea.
We also had another question from Discord.
Mhm.
Do you use both translate and rotate when moving the
Oh,
head?
okay. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Depends on the rig. I prefer to use the neck control whenever I can because of I want to feel like I'm moving the neck on purpose. And when I'm using translate for the head, um, you have to be keeping in mind the length of the neck at all times. Uh, but depends on the situation, depends on the rig. If the rig doesn't have a very nice neck control, you're probably gonna rely more on the translate of the neck. Dogs are going crazy. And depends if it's more cartoony, then it makes more sense to stretch and squash the neck. On a situation like this that I'm trying to go very realistic and precise, it's a lot easier for me to rotate the neck than to be figuring out if I'm overstretching the neck or not. There are some rigs that are going to limit your neck stretch as well. That maybe helps, but overall, I think it's usually a bit easier for me to wrap my head around if I'm animating neck or head. If I'm forcing myself to animate the neck, you see what I mean? Because it's really the neck that is moving the head. So it's sort of like when we're animating an IK arm. Usually, if you're animating an IK arm, you're animating just the hand, and we sometimes forget about the shoulder, right? It's sometimes I mean, the shoulder is what dictates the motion of the arm. So it doesn't make sense that over that I don't think about it or leave it aside. And it's the same thing for the head. So the neck is super important and it's the base of everything. So I try to use the neck control because at least for how my mind works, it forces me to think about it more deeply. But they both do the same thing in the end. Depending on the rig, if you move the head, it's going to be doing the same shape. So as long as you keep in mind that is what's motivating the motion is the head, the neck, you can still move it. And depending on the style, as I was saying, sometimes you need to use the translate of the head to create some sort of arc that is a bit more stylized or precise or more rounded or something like that. Is a lot easier to do with a translate. But me personally, I use more the neck rotation because of the style of animation I usually do. In VFX, you're rarely going to be animating the translates of the head because you have to be fighting back the stretch, um, and the way the rigs are done as well. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, let me.
Richie just replied and he said yes.
Yes, for sure. Cool, Richie. Last rotation. Another rotation that way. I feel like I'm dropping here, but it shouldn't. Let me know if this is all making sense in Maya so far, guys. Seems pretty straightforward. I think most of the time you're gonna have more questions when you try it, but let me know if you have any. Okay. Is this something? Yeah, this is something that gets very addicting when you figure out that you can extract complexity from a reference. It becomes very addicting to see references sometimes and try to match it. And every time you do, you learn something different because not every motion is the same. So whenever I see something different that I never did before, if you start to salivate, see, oh, I really want to try that and figure out where it's coming from. So that's the thing that I was saying. This process is both important for you whenever you have to try to match your reference, depending on the style. Let's say, for example, you're animating a dance. It makes a lot of sense that you go through this process of breaking down all the little movements of your dancer reference. Something like Fortnite emotes, for example, you'll be extracting a lot from the references, and you need all the little new ones from there because it needs to feel very precise. And depending on the style, you don't have to go that far, but you are going to have that base knowledge. And what happens sometimes as well is that depending on the style that you're animating, sometimes the creative part is going to be more in the planning than in the actual Maya part. Uh, and sometimes it's going to be more whatever you do in Maya to figure out and make it appealing and more stylized. So every show that you work on is going to be different. And every show you're going to work on, you're going to be using references in a different way too. But again, if I know how to use the references to the more complex way, it's easier to figure out below that, you know? It's not automatic. You have to still study how to stylize or get into a certain style. You have to learn styles as well, right? So you're not going to be an artist that you trained your whole life to be a realistic portrait painter and suddenly you're great at cartoons. You're going to have to figure that out as well. But you're going to have a lot more baggage. And as I was showing there, Blanking, for example, I feel very confident to know that, to say that all those masters from the past, Milt Call, Blanking, or James Baxter, or whatever, I feel very hard to believe that they are not very accomplished artists and in their own extent, and they don't understand the real world. You know, they didn't start this drawing Disney. That's what I mean. They started with something else with other base knowledge. I'm pretty sure you can find great art, other types of art that they can do because that's how their brain works, I guess. Okay, so I'm just trying to see. I'm pushing back more. Should be going up more. Some more rotation here, more here. So the way the way I'm trying to understand where the movement is coming from is looking at different points, right? So it's like I'm seeing that one of the shoulders drop more than the other. That means I have a little more rotation that way, you know? So I'm trying to understand what type of motion is happening here. Oh, that's cool. Found some blanking examples. Yeah, even that Tarzan example that we were seeing, it's super interesting to me how they studied the forms below him to design him, like the muscle part of it. Because in the end, everything we do in animation is either grounded on reality or breaking that rule for comedy or appeal or anything. Okay. Just notice I never saved this. That's very risky. Don't do that. Okay, so let me do the following. I'm gonna turn off my reference so I can play up back real time. So yeah, this is gonna work. This is base. What I can do as well is sometimes if your reference is not cached in yet, you can change here to play every frame. When you play your whole shot, that's gonna ensure that your reference is gonna be cached and you can play back faster later. Just a little tip. Tom is saying, I'm reading a sketching book by Ron Husband from Disney, and he mentions that even at Disney they constantly, figure drawing workshops. Makes sense. I mean, cool. Yeah, exactly. Especially when your art form is based on drawing every day, like you have to be really strong at understanding why the forms are like they are. Okay, cool. So that is basically a rough match of whatever is happening on the reference. So let's jump into the head now and the neck, of course. So what I'm going to try to do is um, you can try. Oh, let me see. Oh yeah, cool. Loads faster. Is the JS reference? No. Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, cool. So we have two controllers for this guy. In this case, sometimes I'm going to try to rotate them together to get the effect that I want. So remember this image here. So I know that by rotating my head up, it's not only the head controller that is moving. So this makes it okay because it's well rigged, but this should be a bit more precise, right? So I can even rotate both controls together. For the most part, this could even work as a first pass. But anyway, I'll just keep in mind. Sometimes I'm gonna be using both together. Sometimes I'm gonna be using only one, because you see when I rotate here, this rig has, yeah, it connects with the neck pretty well. So sometimes, depending on the rig, is gonna feel very isolated. Sometimes not. But anyway, sorry, the head rotation here, if I did it like this, it's not the right thing, right? Because I'm seeing that whenever I do this, the whole neck bends to the side. So this is when we would be the more natural way of bending the neck. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we are animating the head control, but the head control is just results of neck muscles moving. But we also need to keep in mind this guy here. This, interesting, depending on, yeah, as I was saying, this rotation doesn't do much. So that makes it more clear that it's coming more from the neck control. So we have to keep in mind both, really. Okay, so let's see. In terms of the head angle, I think I should be a bit more like this. And the neck should be a bit more forward. Okay, so I'm going here. And he's also using a bit of that head tilt. So the range is also very important because I want to get the same intensity that I have on my reference. So you see the matching process or the observation process is really when I'm jumping from one frame to the other, I can compare what I'm doing to what the reference is doing. And by instinct, I'm already probably doing whatever I need to fit in my character a bit better. So it's different than applying like mocap curves because I'm already posing it in a way that makes sense here. I'm not going to be breaking the rig if I can avoid it. Cool. So I'm going to be finding the most important pose changes here, for example, from here to here. So here's the interesting part. So normally what you would do is I would just go to the next pose and try to match it, right? But do you see what happens here? Before he starts rotating, you see how the head kind of rotates up slightly. So this is a little detail that I want to get. And this, again, observation. So I'm going to go frame by frame now. That's what I'm saying. I don't really care about the animation part of it yet. I'm just trying to understand what's happening there and have a similar motion. And the same happens on the next rotation, if you noticed. So you see how that changes? That little thing in the beginning changes how it feels like he anticipates is kind of leading with the chin. So it's a small thing, but it really changes the feeling of the head changing direction, doesn't it? It's one frame. And that is what makes it feel like it offsets a little bit as well, the this rotation from the other. And here the same thing happens, you see? So in this case, I'm choosing to go kind of straight ahead, even with those little details. And that's a lot of detail early on, right? So you don't have to be married with that. You don't have to be writing it in stone, but it's like that's what I mentioned. It's kind of like doing a manual mocap pass that you were figuring out your poses already because you already have all those little details early on. Then if you don't uh, so you can keep this as a base, for example, and maybe create a layer and animate on top. But this, or you can choose to not even do that depending on the style. But for this exercise, it's important. Oops. All good so far, everyone?
Fernando, do you have time to chat about um, maybe any potential issues from going step to spline for this, or feel
Right.
free to.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I think if you're going, yeah, if because we're doing a, as I was saying, a rough pass, visual pass, it's very likely that if you're doing it on stepped, once you turn it to spline, it's going to be dirty. So doing it on stepped has the advantage of maybe you're going to be seeing a better result. So this matching pass is going to be looking great in stepped because even though it might have a few kinks here and there, the automatic transitions that are going to be there, uh, they're making it even more dirty. You see what I mean? So I would say it's definitely fair to do this in stepped. I like to keep it in spline because I'm already seeing and comparing both motions, especially in a case like this where there's not a lot of controllers. If I was going to do something that is more a full body uh, shot or a full body mechanics, then I think I would lean in stepped more because I don't want to be seeing knee pops or elbow pops very soon. And that happens in IK legs. It's like inevitable. Uh, and if you're in stepped mode, you're not going to be seeing those automatic transitions. So I would say, depending on the case, I would even go stepped, and it's going to be feeling a lot cleaner watching it that way. And if you go to spline later, you're going to have a lot of keys, right? That's what I was saying. Maybe you don't want to have all those keys depending on the style that you're animating. So those little frame by frame parts that I'm doing, you might not even need that. But at the same time, if you want it, if you liked it, so for example, if you like something that you've seen in the reference like I did here, it's fair to do that even on stepped. It's not a problem to have it, to have something on ones, um, if it's an important detail, you know. We just don't want to be adding detail to stuff that is not important. So for example, I see that sometimes people would, even on step mode, people would try to go on choose no matter what. Uh, and I don't really like to work like that because I don't need details. Sometimes if I'm just on a moving hold on a step mode, I don't really need to be on choose because the details that I'm grabbing from is gonna be a lot easier to do in spline later, with any layers or reading cycle or stuff like that. So I would say, even depending, regardless if you are on stepped or spline, I would just grab the important details that you want to grab or extract, or the complexity that you liked. And it doesn't matter if it's on ones or twos, it's still gonna work in spline later. You just have to make sure that you don't polish it and make it disappear. But normally, the most they're gonna you're probably seeing some animators that block in step really clean. I think that will be almost like polishing it a little bit before you go to spline to make sure that everything's correct. So I don't think it's a problem to have a lot of keys. It's mostly a case of understanding what do you actually need, and sometimes you don't. For example, here, from here to here, I didn't feel like I needed anything else, but here I did. So I just, uh, as I was saying, because I'm kind of turning off my animation brain, except for the observation parts, I'm not really caring about cleanliness of the timeline. And that is something that I learned when, especially when you need a lot of complexity. The other option would be to block very rough with more sparse keys and try to add that complexity later. But if you have a reference, I don't think, I mean, you can do that later. You could do like every 4 frames, you can do match a reference. And then later, when you're in spline, you can go and grab those little details. That works too. Um, so the workflow itself, I think, depends on what you want to animate and what is your preference, really. So as long as you're putting details on what needs details and not everything, I think you should be fine. And does that make sense, Lucy?
It does. Thank you. We had a user over on YouTube asking for help with some stepped and spline issues. And
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, that's usually how I would approach it. Regardless if I'm using layered animation, stepped animation, I try to. That's also something cool to keep in mind. Like, try to know a little bit of everything. Don't try to be married to one workflow, because every shot has its optimal way to be animated. Not the same for everyone, I think, but definitely has every every shot you should be doing a slightly different style workflow, because it's easier, you know. And if you're making your life easier, you're also getting more quality in the end, because you're going to have more time to polish and do everything else. Okay, cool. There you go. So we're gonna. So you see that is a lot of repetition in terms of the rotations, but every rotation is a little different. So that's why I thought it was pretty cool to try to match this as well. If I would be posing it, I'll probably be ignoring a few of the variations, and I would have to build that later on. So with this way of doing the matching, you gain a lot of complexity very, very early. But you can't always do that as well. So you have to be very careful when you're doing stuff on ones, because anything you do that goes past a little bit, it's a bit bigger, has the potential to look like a pop. So with every frame change, I'm checking the angle of the head, the range that it goes, trying to get close to it. So soon we're going to be, yeah, so here's where we finish with the little head shakes. Like around 10:66. So let's get to it. Okay, so here I didn't do the frame by frame thing, and look what happens. I don't have a precise change of direction like I did there, so I'm gonna build that in. Is that, as I was saying, like certain things, if you go on choose, you lose because, and sometimes I can almost feel like some when something was animated on choose because I want blocked on choose because it's missing a little bit of the sharpness that sometimes only happens on ones. Oh, one thing to mention is one of the reasons why I animated the chest or the body first is because I already have a similar motion to what the reference is doing. So I kind of know that something on the head moving, I don't have to be worrying about that. I just have to be worrying about having the same performance. But like moving in space is already going to be doing the same thing as the reference because it's connected. So that's why it's important to do your base first. Connect my headphones. One sec. Should probably save this every now and then. When I'm talking, I always forget. So
We have
here's
another
yeah, go ahead.
question from YouTube if you have time.
Yeah, sure.
This user asked specifically about the shoulders, but I think it's a good question for anything that can rotate. Does it matter how many rotation axes you use?
No. Usually it matters in the sense that if you use only one, it's usually going to feel less organic. because our bodies are not moving in only one axis. So one of the axes are almost always going to be the how do you call it? Not the most important or the one that drives it. So, for example, if I'm animating the shoulder, I'll probably be using one of the axes a lot more than the others. But I should keep the other ones in mind because it makes it feel like it's not only one direction, because our bodies, they feel like everything kind of moves in arcs a little bit because it's not only one axis; it's like a lot of axes acting together. It's pretty much what happens to the head, right? So if you check the nose, it's gonna feel like it has a lot of arcs because there's three axes acting together. So I would definitely keep in mind to try to have a main axis for something like this motion. For example, the main axis would be this one, but I'm using the other ones as a way to first match the reference. But if I was going to animate this from scratch now, I know that the head rotations of this guy kind of do that. So I would be trying to always use a little bit of the other axes. And this is something that sometimes you're not going to do much on blocking, but this is something that you can help your polishing later. So if you notice that there was something that you used or that you isolated too much to one axis, you can always go back and slightly move some splines around to make it look like it's a bit more organic. So that was a good question. So keep in mind, not try to activate other axes. What's interesting here is that I don't have a nose on this guy, so I rely a lot on the shape changes of the head. It's a little easier when you have a nose. Maybe I'll just draw a nose here. But I do have this little, I don't know, little shape in the middle, like almost like a little pucker, so I can kind of track from that. So you realize like all this like head shaking is a bit repetitive. So once I figure it out, the first one, it becomes easier to navigate through the rest and go faster. This sort of thing, like I'm seeing that this angle is very important to this motion, and this is not something that I would have figured by myself. Usually, I would think I would prioritize doing a lot of this and then being a little of this angle to create some arcs. But you see, this is also something I notice a lot of people overlook is this head tilt motion. It's super important for how natural the head movement will be. The motions are becoming more and more subtle. So I think I don't need the neck here anymore. Because in this case, the head controller already moves the mesh of the neck a little bit. So I'm gonna rely more on the head on this part. So trying to be very precise to how big are the motions. Not even playing back anything and just matching it, and then we're gonna play blast later to see how successful that was. So here I figured, okay, so this is very subtle motion. So I'm gonna space out my frames more because I don't need anything too precise there. So I'm just gonna change the angle slightly. Here he kind of lifts it very slightly as well. So this part is going to be interesting because it has a lot of complex. Yeah, here I definitely need the frame by frame thing. Trickiest part, I think, is figuring out when you have to use the neck control and the head control. In this case, I felt like I needed to use the neck because his head is kind of falling to the side a bit. So it's going, so you see, if I don't have the neck, it feels like my head rotation is going to be a bit isolated. But if I use it, feels like it's more like curving the neck as well. Oh, one thing I forgot to say, quick tip. In this case, I'm using pretty much the same angle and camera as the reference. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're going to have a great reference. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to use this next time on Manny, so I have a nose. Yeah, so I was going to say, yeah, yeah, when I use the angle here, sometimes I want to use the neck. For example, here I feel like I need to use the neck to rotate him down. Yeah, so I was going to say about the camera. So in this case, I have the same camera as the reference. If I don't, by any chance, I can create a secondary camera that matches my reference angle and use that to do this matching pass. Let's say I grab the reference from YouTube. so I can use that instead of animating from another angle. That usually helps this matching process. It's also interesting to gain this skill to animate stuff on one sometimes, because you gain a lot of uh, power when you need to animate something more precise. So this part I feel is very challenging because it changes every frame pretty much. That's probably the most challenging part so far. Yeah, I see some missing something here. So he uses the head tilt a bit, and then here he changes back. It's very subtle. So you definitely see, if you track his chin or the top of his head, he has a little bit of that rotation working. I can even try to exaggerate that slightly.
We actually have a question from Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Suba asks, at times the camera view posture looks weird in perspective. Is it good to proceed or stick to the boundary?
Oh, yeah, you should definitely always keep in mind the perspective view, because if you're animating too much to camera, you could be doing some weird things that are not going to be super noticeable on the camera, but sometimes you feel like there's something weird about it. So I always try to keep an eye on whatever is happening on the perspective view. The way I work with like this viewport being the ones I use select the controls, I'm always keeping an eye on perspective automatically because I'm using this, you know. So it's always cool to rotate around and see what's happening, to make sure that you're not doing any illegal motions. I would definitely keep an eye.
AJ suggests you can change the focal length in Maya to counter Maya's 35 millimeter and to
Right,
possibly
yeah,
try 50 millimeter to 100.
for sure. Yeah, the camera also makes a difference.
I have another question from YouTube if you're open to it.
Yeah.
Let's say someone wants to make this feel kind of like a feature animated film and make it snappy and smooth. Would there be a different approach?
Yeah, I think you would use the reference a bit more loosely. So, for example, the way I'm checking out the motions of his head really depends of my objective, is not only the style. So, if you watch a Pixar movie, for example, uh, some shots are going to be a bit more stylized for humor than others. And sometimes when the mood is a bit more serious, you're going to see a little more complexity. So I would say it depends on what your objective. You could definitely still use this as a base for a feature animation style, but you maybe don't need to go to the same frame by frame route as long as you figure out the head tilts that are important to give the head weight. If you need to go snappier, it means your timing is going to be faster, right? So I'm not sure if that is going to be something you apply too much for acting, because if you make a head motion snappier, it might mean something different in the body language, you know? So I would try to figure out more how much you want to stylize than um, in terms of how much more precise you're going to make the arcs and spacing. Then, I mean, how much smoother you want to make the arcs and spacing after this pass. But I'm definitely probably not going to be doing this like frame by framey spots here. I would go a bit looser, more like every 4 frames. I would try to do what the reference is doing, and then I would fill in the gaps with something more visual. Um, what usually happens is when you need a more like smooth style animation, you would be thinking a lot of about the spacing and the arcs in making them feel more graphical. So if you match something a little looser, like let's say every 5 frames, or at least the main performance you match from the reference, but you're not very concerned with the minute little motions that the head is doing in certain parts, then you can match only like the extremes of the reference, and you fill in the gaps manually later, forgetting about the reference. You're going to be animating your head to create something more of a stylized arc or spacing. That's probably what I would do. Um, that said, some more stylized animation still use something really close to what I'm doing here, like Arcane, for example. Is going to be very faithful to the reference. So in that case, if you don't have a very very strong acting reference, you're probably not going to be very successful on that style, because you're mostly following it to grab all the little complexity things that you want. Even something that has a lot of complexity doesn't necessarily need to feel realistic. If you're animating to make it fit your character, um, and maybe you exaggerate it a little more, create bigger motions based on the same thing, on the same. For example, I'm seeing the head rotations here. You see that I'm creating this frame by frame bits because he is kind of like anticipating the motion with the head tilt, the rotation Z there. Uh, if I had the similar thing but more exaggerated, I could still be in the same realm, you know? So it's just a matter of seeing how what you actually want to grab from the reference, what is important for you to have, and seeing how you want to be more precise in terms of having a very precise and beautiful arc and spacing than something that feels a little more realistic because it has some sort of dirtiness and spacing that is more unpredictable. But I would say there's definitely things from this that you can apply to feature for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. I'm just gonna go up to here. Then we'll see how this is going. I'm trying to get this part. So this was also a challenging part because I felt like the way he's rotating his head here has some stop and go to the spacing as well. So we'll see how that works. There's something to be said about, I think what Subha was asking there about, yeah, how would you go about using this for more like a feature animation or cartoony style? Depending on, for example, I would, if I was gonna animate something more like Pixar Disney style, which is more stylized than this, if you're unsure, you can still do a matching pass like this and spend a couple of hours, which is pretty much what we're doing here. And you can always choose to clean up some things. So if you're unsure, match the complexity and you can always get rid of it, as long as you're not spending the huge amount of time on something that's going to be thrown away. That sometimes you can benefit from trying to match what you did, and you're going to be understanding the motion better. This part is tricky because the chest is rotating and is taking the head at the same time. But at some point, I feel like here he kind of counters the head rotation. This is one of the hardest things to notice, I think, on the observation part of it. So you see that the chest is rotating a lot, but it doesn't feel like the head is rotating a lot, which means I should probably have the head stay back and then it goes again. That's what it gives that feeling that it has a stop and go a little bit on the nose. What's interesting as well that we are always avoiding stuff going together. You probably heard that a bunch of times, right? So things are moving together here, break it up. And that becomes sort of an instinct. So you will never do something like this, for example. You see how the head kind of follows the body kind of a lot. So that kind of unwinds a little bit some vices that you have of how you think the head should move to how they actually move. That said, you can always break it up a little bit if you think, okay, the realistic way is definitely feeling like it's following too much. So you can change, but you don't have to change. The same thing with symmetry. Not always symmetry is wrong. Sometimes some motion is going to be more symmetrical. And if you break it up, it doesn't look natural anymore. You just want to get rid of the perfection, usually. If something is like too coincidental, like too perfect, then usually it's hard to convince that this should happen. Oh, this one is tough. What is happening here? So yeah, changing down a bit. Okay, I think the neck is kind of countering. So the head is kind of staying in place. think it's similar to that. Save it once again. Tilting a little bit of the head. Now that's interesting as well. Like I start a slow rotation and then kind of stops and suddenly rotates again. Again, that's the kind of thing that we would rarely have an idea to do if we're not doing it based on reference. In this case, I'm not rotating the neck because I see that my controller doesn't do anything when I'm using the sideways rotation. It's more like when I need to go forward or sideways or to the side. So here, yeah, the neck is coming forward a bit. Yeah, and this part I think is challenging in a different way because we don't have any more of those sharp motions happening. It's all kind of going together with the body again. So that's an interesting opportunity to figure out what should we actually do with the head when is not breaking down from the body too much, and why should it look natural doing that. So we notice that it's always sort of activating one axis. So it's going down here, it's kind of tilting that way, going up. Neck should be coming forward a bit. And also, one thing to keep in mind, so all the way up to here, the neck and the head felt very independent somehow. I mean, it's connected, but it's sort of like independent of the body motion because it has all those little muscles affecting only the head for the most part. But there's something about going from this to this slow and connected motion that adds contrast to the motion, right? So not everything is uh, super independent in the head. So sometimes the head goes more with the body, and we don't always have to break it up as well. Same thing I was saying about symmetry, just what we observe from the world. We might want to break it up more in our animation if we want, but doesn't mean that is something that we do because it's in nature. Here's a lot of the neck. in some ways, if you notice the actor's face there, he's very intense, right? So it feels like he is constricting his muscles more, and maybe that's why his head is not moving as much, which gives us another feeling in terms of body language as well. So if we break it up too much, maybe we lose a little bit of that. There's one thing I'm learning from this is that this angle is something that's very important. Without that, it becomes very simplified and one axis like this, and I'm guilty of overusing this a lot, and I feel like a lot of people forget about this guy, and it completely changes the feeling of the motion, doesn't it? It's just lifting the head, but if I don't have it, it looks super simplified. So I'm forgetting about the face. I'm looking only at the forehead and the hair, and the head is actually rotating up and that way because the face is doing a lot. It's hard to track what's happening. It's weird if you compare those two frames. It looks like he's off model here. You will get a note like you're breaking the rig. It's super squashed the face. Okay, almost there. So here, definitely using the neck to tilt that way. And definitely he's posturing back his neck more here. You see the difference, like I'm gonna zero the neck here. So you see the difference between using only this controller and using this, how you move the head. It feels different doing this than less. Here I feel like I'm missing something in the chest. Maybe not. Okay, let's see how this works. And
While you're play blasting that, Fernando, I
I
have a
know,
question.
after 2 hours.
When you're working on a shot like this, I have, the most controversial question. Do you
Mhm.
listen to music or no music?
Oh, I not a very good example in that. I listen to podcasts, music, anything. I feel very bored if I'm not listening to anything. Sometimes when I feel like I have to focus, I pause it. It's like when you're driving and you have to back up your car and you turn down the music for some reason. Yeah, that's what I feel. But when it's super like, it was a very good chunk of repetitive stuff. And I was talking to you guys, so it fills in the gaps, but it feels very alone and miserable if I don't listen to anything.
Was it the same previous to working from home when you were in the studio environment?
Yeah, especially I think because there's a lot more distraction. So you, when I'm listening to music or a podcast or something, I shut off the rest of stuff, and I'm focusing only on what I'm seeing and not everything that's around too.
Mm.
Depends because, and also I felt like if you didn't have your headphone on, people would feel like they could talk to you when they were enemy. You see what I mean?
Thank you for answering my question. Thought I'd throw some controversy in there.
Yeah. So look at my manual mocap. Are you guys able to see this like kind of real time or?
Yes.
So let me know what you guys think. But me after, I mean, a couple of hours, if you get this, um, after a couple of hours, you can consider it's blocking, right? So this is really valuable skill to get because you could solve a acting shot that you have a good reference for in a few hours, and then is just going to be polishing left and face and stuff like that. So if you have this, you can spend days on the face. There's already a very good base, and I probably should have spent a bit more time on the body even, but when you start to understand all those little details and nuance, I feel like we captured a lot of the juicy stuff that was on the reference. That was very sharp spacing that we were looking at earlier, and it helps you get away from that sort of sameness that we see sometimes on animation. So having a super sharp head motion sometimes will make you stand out because you feel like you recognize it, because we seen it on reference. So I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's not gonna be automatic from the first time that you try this. That okay, you're not gonna do this in 2 hours maybe at first, but if you train your observation enough, uh, oh, you're saying, yeah, I understand why you animated the chest first now. Yeah, see. So it has a lot of that drifting already on the chest, and it supports a lot of the head motion. So if I didn't have the chest animated, I wouldn't know how much I would have to push the neck forward and stuff like that. And even seeing a character that doesn't have a face like this, you can still feel like he has the same sort of body language, right? So that's the whole goal behind it. And we are supposed to be able to do this with any reference and any body part. Sometimes it's going to be a bit more on a, like an acrobatic assignment, or something that is has a lot more range of motion, less detail. Um, it's going to be a bit easier online. So, for example, if you have to animate a dance, like I was saying for Fortnite, you would be probably a lot more closer to the reference than this. For example, here I'm trying to capture the complexity from all the little head motions, but I could go a bit simpler, or if I just spend a few hours on this, I could figure out some things that I feel, okay, this may be too mocappy. I think I can improve the arcs and spacing of the nose. This is a bit too poppy. Um, and you feel like the neck is moving as well, doesn't it? So that's why I was saying I was always trying to motivate the motion from the neck. Uh, yeah, uh, pretty much. I feel like that could be almost. I think after I learned how to do this a bit, I felt a lot. How would I say, safer, that I could animate anything that I had a reference for. Uh, in an easy way, because I know how to grab the complexity from that. And if you do this enough, you're going to start to um, you're going to start to feel like you can do this from memory as well. You see what I mean? So even if you had a few poses, uh, you should be able to create similar types of action from scratch. So imagine, for example, as I was saying, this resembles a lot how I think Arcane was animated. Uh, of course, it was more like stylized to the character and more exaggerated, but it has all the complexity of the references. Uh, but imagine the shots on Arcane that you didn't have reference for, or it was an action that is not possible to do reference for. So, and still has to fit in the same style. So what do you do in that case? You need to have studied a lot this sort of way of doing it, so you would have on your memory or your instinct a lot of these actions and this type of sharpness that you can put into the head, for example, sometimes. So you're able to replicate it in a way that is more from memory than anything else. So usually a shot that you don't have reference for is more aimed to more experienced animators naturally. So that is by design, because you need the experience. Otherwise, you wouldn't know exactly what to do, right? But if you train yourself to, or force yourself to actually create this type of assignments to test and learn, you're going to get more experience without even animating a bunch of shots. You see what I mean? So it's kind of like uh, a shortcut. You don't have to animate a 200 frame shot to learn something. Sometimes you just have to do a little test. Do an arm, do a leg, do a foot. I'll show you guys something that I always show to everyone. It was this. Let me try to find it. It's not figure animation. It's not human, but you see what I mean. So this was the first shot that I got on his dark materials. Let me just play this first, so it's better. So yeah, this shot here. It was the feet, the paws of the bear. And it was first time I was animating a bear, and first time I was animating a paw. So this, because it didn't have anything else but the paws, it kind of forced me to understand how the toes would react when I hit the ground. Normally, we would just do a little splay, right? But that felt like it didn't have connection to the ground or it didn't have friction. So uh, this was pretty much what made me understand contact with the ground, for example. So this was, in a way, a test that I could be doing as a study to understand how to animate a paw, or isolating stuff usually helps you wrap your hand around something. So even if you want to do some full body mechanics shot, that's important because you can understand how that character moves and how the broad motions work. But personally, I feel so attracted to this kind of thing that it's tiny details that make a whole difference in the shot.
Out of curiosity, Fernando,
Hmm.
on the polar bear shot, between the how you showed how you approach a shot like
Hmm.
this today, and then adding all those final details, the jiggle and the contacts
Oh,
and everything, how long do you think
yeah,
that took
that's
you?
a good question because I, in the same way I mentioned here that okay, I'm gonna treat blocking as I'm gonna do something in a few hours or a day. So no matter what I can achieve in that time or the time frame, I'm going to consider the blocking. So no matter how much detail I put on it. So in this case, I felt like I'm not going to be able to see the shot or feel the shot if I don't have any toes jiggling, for example. So what I did is I did the initial motion of the paw for sure, like stepping, but I wanted to feel the weight early on. So I tried to figure out, for example, I had one control here that would rotate and create this jiggle on the shin. And then I was trying to figure out, okay, so he's gonna hit his paw like from the side. So that means that this is gonna jiggle first, then it's gonna cascade to the rest. So I pretty much animating one of the toes like with the pivot below here and kind of jiggling like that. And I copied those curves to the other toes and offset. So I was able to get a pretty good feeling of, you see how they kind of all react, but with slightly different frames. So when I see this, I see, okay, I think I'm close. And because it was quick to do the steps, because it's only the pause, I could spend the extra few hours figuring out what happens to the toes, and I'm able to sell the weight of the shot better. So sometimes I would put details early on, just in a rough way. It's not polished and it's not great contact with the ground yet. But what I try to treat blocking as is whatever needs to be there to sell the shot. So, for example, in this rest of the shots here, same thing, like this little jiggle on the head when he enters and steps. Uh, is something that is easy to put on a layer with a few keys, and you already get um, a lot better result if you didn't have that. So it's even hard to review if you don't have sometimes some of those details. So depending on what's the objective of the shot, I would say put that early on if you can. If doesn't make sense, like for example, if you have a tiger coming in, I wouldn't animate the tail on the first pass, for example, because it doesn't help me a lot. It doesn't sell the shot. But I would definitely like whenever the tiger hits the ground or something, I would have some jiggle on the chest or the leg, whatever feels like it's a free win, like a low hanging fruit. I would try to do that on blocking to help me sell the shot, because you have to always think in two ways. I think about blocking. Uh, I would say you have to think about your own process and why you're doing blocking is because you need to see the shot becoming ready first before you commit to polishing something and lose too much time and you figure out you're in the wrong path. So that's your own process, and in an organized way, you're never gonna start from a big detail to something too polished. But there's also the work process, right? So we need to use blocking to approve our animation as well. So I'm often trying to put things in my blocking that I think will help sell the shot or explain the shot better to whoever is reviewing it. So it'll be the director, the client, or the supervisor. As long as it's something that makes sense to be there and free. So I would add it in. For example, a path like this, it feels a bit crazy to do something so detailed on blocking, but if it's super quick, why not? That's my whole model. So uh, I don't force myself to do only key poses. For example, I mean, depending on the show, right? So if I need, let's say, if the sequence is not figured out enough that we need to have key poses to know where the character sits, then it makes sense. I have an example of that. For example, this guy, which is the bane of my existence. This shot was a nightmare to animate, but it looked cool. So, but this wasn't a figured out choreography at first. So I needed to uh, do key poses first to figure out who they sit and what happens and what time, and then I would figure out the rest. But I try to treat every shot with their own story and their own way to be animated, because it's just easier in the end. I'm just trying. I always say that, but I'm guided by laziness. So in a way, you have to figure out the easiest way to do something. Of course, it's not by laziness, but is because that's going to be helping you go faster and achieve a better result. So it's win-win to everyone. Okay,
We
let's
did
see.
have one question from
Yeah.
Discord. At some point, either now or at the end of the stream, would you be up to kind of like expand the graph editor and show us?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good. I never opened it. Oh, it's open, but I barely looked at it, to be honest. But you'll see. Let me just play back this in high, and I'll send you guys this playblast somehow on the chat. So okay, let me just grab this link and I'll send it to you guys, and I'll show you the graph. Uh-huh. Okay, let me get this. I'll send the link. I'll put it on the chat on Discord. If you can send it on Twitch, maybe. Let's see.
Let me just make sure. I don't think no one can access your drive. So let me.
Yeah, I just kept it as a link. So, okay, let's see the craziness of this. So, selecting the head. Oh, it's not too bad. Look at that.
Would you be up to make it bigger so we can
Oh, yeah.
really get a good look at those juicy graphs? Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely like a few flats that we could polish. This kind of stuff. But it's not as bad as I thought.
How would you go about addressing those flat points in the curve? Would you add a little roundness? Would
Yeah,
you?
I would just simply do something like this. Of course, I would always have it open beside my camera to make sure I'm not getting rid of any complexity that I may be doing by mistake. So let's say, for example, here. So yeah, this is flat. Let me see what happens. Yes, that's fine. So I'm not changing the intent of the animation, right? So this could be something as well. Like anything like this, I would do first a pass on the graph. So for example, I do see that this is super straight. Whenever I see big straight lines in graph editor, it means that this is super even. So this is an opportunity for me to tighten things up like that. Yeah, but it's not too bad. I mean, I think I was sort of precise with, but it's not usually the case. Sometimes it's gonna be looking pretty dirty. I think I did this way too many times already. Yeah, these sort of things I would definitely polish a little bit. And I'm looking for stuff that are red flags that I know are probably going to be issues. This, of course, I'm getting something by adding a slight motion in there. Yeah, but this is the sort of thing that I would refrain from changing too much. Like this is the head tilt, right? So this was, if I feel like any part of it was a bit poppy, then I might go in and adjust because this was not the intention. So I would do sort of like a sanity check or QC check on my spline before I go and start to mark things down that I need to polish, Yeah, that's about it. Do you guys have any other questions? Is this too scary? Does that make sense? Or are you crazy putting keyframes on ones in blocking?
Thank you so much, Fernando. It would actually be super helpful if anybody here watching today could let us know how we could improve events like these,
For
or
sure.
let us know what we're doing right and how this helped you. There is a participant survey in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, and
Oh,
just to say, let's see, as I mentioned in the beginning, I will be very interested to see if you guys do tests like this. Definitely post it on the chat. Which chat should it be?
there's
Discord.
several places that could work in the Discord. I think maybe in the feedback channel, the 3D feedback channel, and
Yeah.
then that way you could also get feedback from your peers and
Yeah, that would be awesome. So if you guys do any tests like this, post it there. You can tag me. I'll be very interested to see if it made sense to everyone and if you guys benefit from it. It would be very cool to know.
we also have a few questions coming in.
Yeah,
The Blender Royal over on YouTube asked, if you don't mind me asking, do you have any 3D animation reel recommendations or things you personally look for in a reel when considering someone for their first job in the industry?
for
With,
demo reels.
yeah.
Um, I think you just have to be mindful where you're aiming for. So I would say have a good objective early on. So, for example, my objective is to do VFX or to work in feature animation or whatever games maybe. So your reel should be geared towards that. That's the most important thing. So you're never going to be able to land a game job, for example, if you only have cartoon acting, for example. um, so you need stuff that resembles the kind of work that that company or that industry does, so if you want to do creature animation, you should have a bunch of creatures, action, um, anything that is more realistic to show that you can do that, so that's the most important thing. Aside from that, just try to not to go too long with your demo reel, like go 1.5 minutes. And especially early on when you're a student, you're not going to have a lot of stuff to put in anyway. So don't overcrowd it with a lot of stuff. I would say put only your best work, and it's going to happen that some are going to bring your demo reel down and some are going to bring it up. Whenever you are able to replace one of those, just replace them, and try to keep everything at the same level. But I know it's tough because you're learning every month and you're getting better every month. So if you have an assignment from the beginning of the year and another from the end of the year, they're going to feel different in terms of levels. But as long as you are making an effort to keep only your best stuff like in there, and in usually in the best order will be to put your best stuff first, because not everyone wants the full demo review as well. So you don't want to miss any important pieces that you have.
We'll have
And that's the most important thing.
oh, I'm so sorry I
Go
interrupted
ahead,
you.
go ahead.
And we've had a few demo reel reviews happening in the Discord. If you're not a part of the Discord community yet, I think it'd be really awesome
Oh
if you
yeah, that's
joined.
cool.
And we kind of to follow up on that question, let's say, because someone's asking about this in the Discord, let's say someone is working on shots like this because they want to do sort of what you do, like creature
Mm-hmm.
VFX. I guess sort of like this would you consider this mocap, I guess, but this kind of style of shot that you've been demoing today. For
Yeah.
someone first learning this, what is a realistic time frame to spend on a shot like this?
Um, on a test, like if you're, I mean, I wouldn't do, I did like 150 frames, for example. To test, I would probably would do something a bit quicker, like try 60 frames, spend a few days on it, a week maybe. But that's not something that you should be aiming for to your demo reel. If it looks cool, maybe you can use, but try to prioritize the study part. But if you're aiming a shot like this to add facial and stuff like that, you should be aiming for a student would usually take at least like 6 weeks or something like that, 6 to 8 weeks. If you're animating a full shot with facial polishing and stuff like that, so it should be, I think, the amount of time that you need probably.
Thank you. And I am getting a few questions on things
Mm-hmm.
that over on YouTube, I'm getting questions about things that you covered in this stream. For those who don't know, after the stream, the recording is available on wherever you're watching it, whether you're on Twitch or YouTube. So you can always go back and watch again or look for the particular questions you have. And for those, I'm getting a few more demo reel questions in
Yeah,
Discord, but just to be mindful of your time,
yeah, let's
don't
go
feel
for
like
them.
you have to answer because we have a lot of demo reel events planned for the future,
Cool.
and they happen here and there. So,
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much, Fernando. Is
Yeah.
there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up
I
today?
think that's pretty much it. I think there's a lot of information. You guys probably felt that, but um, if you feel like it, always come back to it, and after you tried it a couple of times, go back and rewatch maybe at the beginning or parts of the demo, just so you wrap your hand around it a bit better. Sometimes you're gonna feel like you're trying it and it's not getting the same results. Maybe it's something that you didn't notice while I was demoing it. So, and definitely feel free to send any questions as well on the mentor chats there. Make sure to tag me and I'll try to reply as best as I can.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Um, Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend. And yeah, thank you for coming.
I'll go ahead and end the stream now.